In A.5.2, it says that we need to explain how decision making. Now, I want to talk about this term decision making. So, decision making isn't you saying, should I do my biology homework or shouldn't I do my biology homework? This is talking about decisions made at the synapse. So, the decision either is to send the signal, this is the central nervous system, right? Send the signal in the brain, or not to send the signal. And this all has to do whether you excite or inhibit the message. So there are neurons in the presynaptic neurons, the one before, that will either excite or inhibit that message. So that's kind of like what all this says. I'm going to explain these two concepts in the next two slides. So there's one type of inhibitory process or excitatory process called spatial summation. Before I talk about the different types of summation, I want to remind us about this thing called the threshold. So if you remember that there's a resting potential where the neuron is, if you want to think of it at rest, but it's still pretty busy pumping out sodium and pumping in potassium. But at the resting potential, it has about a negative charge of like 75 or something around there. You need to break a certain value. Usually it's about minus 55. It depends on the organism. I think that's what it is in humans. You need to break a certain value for all those sodium channels to open, if you remember this from human systems, for us to reach this action potential level. And then the definition of an action potential is the depolarization and repolarization. So we're at minus 75, and we need somehow to reach minus 55 in order to send the signal. That's what all this action potential stuff means. So with spatial summation, we can achieve that by the addition, right, of these three presynaptic neurons. That's what these are supposed to be. These are three presynaptic neurons, and here's our postsynaptic neuron. So if I add A plus B plus C, that gets me to minus 55, and I've reached the action potential. And that math, A plus B plus C, is determined at this place called the axon hillock. The axon hillock is a place right, so this is supposed to, I wish it was a little bit better drawing. So if you remember, this is like the cell body of a neuron. Maybe these are my dendrites coming off of it. So at the end of the cell body and right before the axon, the action potential is added up, and it determines if we do or if we don't send that signal. It's possible that we don't have C. And maybe even C is an inhibitory presynaptic neuron. So we go A plus B, and then C is a negative, then we never reach that value we need, and the signal never gets sent. The next type is called temporal. So temporal, when we talk about this word temporal has to do with time. So it's usually, not always, but usually we're talking about the same presynaptic neuron. So if we can send a signal and then another signal and then another signal so that we depolarize, depolarize, and depolarize all, if you can see here, all from neuron A, that will allow us to reach the threshold so we can reach our action potential and continue with that signal as A plus A plus A is added up at this axon hillock, and then we can transmit our signal. It is possible that, as I mentioned before, when we're sending signals and making decisions in the central nervous system, right? If we add a C in there and it's inhibitory, let's say these are excitatory. So A, and maybe we have a negative value, we can prevent that signal from going, which is okay, because that's how our brain works. It's just the signaling and not signaling of potentials that generate some sort of consciousness or perception or understanding in our minds.